From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Welcome to 360 Influence, a life and leadership success podcast for women. Today I'm talking about complacency, or really, I'm talking about kicking complacency to the curb. You know, the definition of complacency, according to Merriam-Webster, is self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual danger or deficiency. And it's something that we probably all have struggled with at some time in life. We kind of get to a place of comfort and we just kind of drift. Maybe we're just in a season that doesn't not focused on growth, or maybe we're just comfortable. But whatever the reason, we become complacent. I had one of my podcast listeners reach out to me and leave me a message, which any of you are welcome to do. You can do that through the Anchor app if you're on Anchor. Just open up the Anchor app on your phone, and when you go to my podcast, there's a message button. Welcome to leave me a message. And so one of my podcast listeners left me a message and said, Rhea, I'm really enjoying your podcast, but would you speak about complacency and specifically how to overcome that? So I really want to drill down on that today and share this with you. Why is it important? Well, if complacency is kind of that feeling of calm or comfort or coasting, but we're really unaware of the dangers. I use the analogy of, we're in a raft or a canoe, and we're in the middle of the river or the creek and just kind of drifting down, and the water's calm and everything is peaceful, and it kind of lulls us into a sense of relaxation. But we're completely unaware that right around the next bend is this big rapid, maybe even a little waterfall. And if we're too complacent, then we're not prepared to deal with the rapids when we get around the bend. So complacency, it's the roadblock to living a life with purpose. Rick Warren talks a little bit about this, and he says, I quote, "Living on purpose is the only way to really live. Everything else is just existing." And you think about that, that's really the tragedy, is that if we're not living a life with purpose, on purpose, and for purpose, we really are just existing. We're not stepping into our potential. We're not fulfilling our life purpose. There's a quote that speaks to this, and I don't know who says it, but it says, "God's gift to us is potential, and our gift to God is developing it." And really, when we become complacent, we are saying, I'm not going to develop my capacity and my potential. And that's unfortunate, because it means that we are limiting ourselves from doing more and having more and being more in life. John Maxwell talks about a little bit about this in one of his books, and I'll quote, he says, "Most people use only a small fraction of their ability and rarely strive to reach their full potential. There's no tension to grow in their lives and little desire to stretch." He goes on to say, "A third of high school graduates never read another book for the rest of their lives." And I think how sad that is, because that means all of those people are not intentionally growing. It just means they're holding themselves back from the life that they were truly designed to live. So, the reason I can share this with you is because there was a time in my life, in my career, when I was complacent. In 2012, I graduated from Auburn University in Montgomery with my MBA. And it had been a long journey to get there. I started going to school in 2002. I started taking night classes, going to school at night and on the weekends, and working full time, and sometimes even 2 jobs while I was going to school. And it had been a long 10-year break, and I'd only taken 1 semester off in that whole 10 years where I just said, I need a break. And when I got done with that MBA, when I graduated, I felt such a sense of relief and accomplishment. But you see, I'd been so focused on that goal that once I reached it, I simply stopped. I didn't know what the next step was. I just kind of got into a season of drifting, a little bit of complacency there. And that's what happens when we are goal oriented. We're focused on the goal, and when we achieve it, we simply stop. So the way to overcome that sense of complacency is to be growth oriented. After I graduated, I told myself, well, oh gosh, I've been working and going to school for 10 years. I deserve a break. There's nothing wrong with that. But if I had been growth oriented, I would have said, let me just take a little break and then get back on track. There's nothing wrong with a season of rest as long as we're intentional about becoming focused once again, so that season doesn't become a lifetime of rest. So the biggest thing that I can tell you, and the biggest tool in your tool belt to overcome complacency, is becoming growth oriented. And there are three things that when you are growth oriented, that you'll know you're growth oriented when you are focused on these three things. Number one, be intentional about developing a personal growth plan. That might look different for you than it would for someone else. My personal growth plan is reading 50 personal growth or leadership development books a year. I like to average one a week because that's one way that I can be focused on growth. Now, yours might not look like reading a book a week. It might be a book a month, and there's nothing wrong with that. Or you might not be interested in reading. You might prefer to listen to podcasts like this one, or maybe it's watching TEDx talks. Whatever it is, there are so many ways and so many resources to develop yourself. But sit down and be intentional about creating a personal growth plan that's going to help you personally and professionally develop you. And if you're consistent about that, you know that you will have a growth oriented focus. And number two, be intentional about stretching. Look for opportunities, whether it's at work, in your career, maybe it's in your personal life. Look for those opportunities to stretch yourself and challenge yourself. Look for ways to become uncomfortable, because often what happens is when we stretch to grow, we learn something new and we grow our level of awareness. And then we look around and go, gosh, what's the next thing? What else can I do to grow? So intentionally looking for ways to stretch yourself, try something new, learn something new. This podcast for me is an example of one way that I stretched myself this year. I've been writing books for several years, and Mac and I do a lot of speaking at all kind of conferences or church groups, youth groups, high schools. But starting this podcast for me this year was one way to stretch. It's something I'd never done before. It's a way to reach more people, but I had to learn some new skills to do it. And I had to be intentional about stretching and learning and investing my time in order to do that. And then number three, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's no other way to say it. Neil Donald Walsh says, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. Now, I don't know if life begins there, but growth certainly does. And it's when you're growth oriented, you just accept it as a fact that you are going to be comfortable being uncomfortable. I love the example of a rubber band. A rubber band is useful for so many things, but it's only useful when it's being stretched. You can wrap it around a stack of papers. You can, if you're like me, you can tie your hair back with it. Or maybe you can put it in a rubber band gun and shoot it at your coworker. But rubber bands are only useful when they're being stretched. And we're the same way. As humans, we are only living into our potential and our purpose when we're growing. And that's going to cause a little bit of discomfort, because movement always causes friction. Far too many people are willing to settle for average in life. And the problem with that is average doesn't excite anybody. Excellence does. But if we're complacent, we're not shining with excellence. We're just settling for mediocre. And it's simply a choice to say, I am better than that. I can do better than that. I can be more. And I'm going to be intentional about that. So those three things will really help you focus on being growth oriented. It really comes down to being intentional. Develop that plan, execute it, intentionally stretching every single day in just a small way, and then becoming comfortable being uncomfortable. Don't settle for average. Far too many people do. But average isn't exciting. Average isn't a life of potential. It's really just existing. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.